I never thought I'd fall for my student's mom, but that night, when her lips brushed mine, I knew I couldn't resist anymore. It all started with a simple tutoring session, and everything changed in an instant. The first time I saw the house, I almost turned back. It stood at the edge of the hill, wrapped in glass and silence, the kind of place that looked too expensive for someone like me to belong in. My scooter's engine sputtered to a stop beside the tall iron gates, and for a moment, I could see my own nervous reflection in the glass panels of the front door. I was only there to tutor a teenage girl in literature, 2 hours, twice a week. Just enough to pay rent and keep my head above water. Nothing more. When the door opened, I expected to see a maid. Instead, a woman stood there, tall, elegant, the kind of beauty that made you stand a little straighter without realizing it. She wore a cream silk blouse tucked into dark trousers, a glass of wine in her hand, even though it was only 4 in the afternoon. Her eyes lingered on me, not rudely, but curiously, like she was trying to figure out what sort of creature had shown up on her doorstep. "You must be the new tutor," she said, her voice low, calm, and textured, like someone used to being listened to. "Yes, ma'am. I'm, Mira," I stammered, a soft smile curved on her lips. "Ma'am makes me sound old." "Call me Clara." Her name settled in my chest like the first note of a song. She led me through the foyer, marble, paintings, and quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't come from peace but from loneliness. We stopped at a study where her daughter sat slouched over a tablet. 17, maybe 18, with the practiced indifference of someone who didn't want to be tutored. "Ella, this is Mira," Clara said. "She'll be helping you with your literature coursework." Ella barely looked up. "Great," she muttered. Clara sighed but smiled at me apologetically. "Teenagers," she whispered, the word soft and fond, like an excuse. The first lesson went as expected. Ella answered half-heartedly, scrolling through her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. I tried coaxing her into analyzing a poem. Yeats, "When You Are Old." She shrugged at every question until I finally started reading it aloud. My voice filled the stillness, and for the first time, Ella's gaze flicked up. Not out of interest, but surprise. Maybe because someone was bringing words alive in that cold room. When the clock chimed 6, I packed my books. Clara reappeared in the doorway, still holding that same glass of red wine, eyes following me like she was studying something more than a tutor's competence. "How was the first day?" she asked. "She's bright," I said carefully. "Just, maybe not very interested." Clara laughed low and husky. "That makes 2 of us." Her honesty startled me. There was something disarming about her, an effortless confidence laced with weariness. I smiled, not sure what to say, and she gestured toward the terrace. "You can leave through here. It's faster to the gate." I followed her, the scent of jasmine from the garden mixing with her perfume. Subtle, expensive, warm. On the terrace, the late sun spilled gold across her hair, and I caught myself staring. She noticed. "What are you studying, Mira?" "Literature. Final year." "Ah. So you love words," I nodded. "Sometimes I think they're the only thing that ever made sense." Her lips curved slightly. "That's a beautiful thing to say." I looked away, feeling suddenly self-conscious. I should go. She tilted her head, her gaze holding mine just a second too long. "You'll be back on Thursday." "Yes, 4 o'clock. "Good," she smiled again. Slow, deliberate. "Ella could use someone like you." But something in her tone, in the way her eyes softened, told me she wasn't just talking about her daughter. Thursday came, and the Thursday after that. The lessons were mostly the same. Ella half engaged, me trying to make Yeats and Keats sound less like chores. But Clara started appearing more often. Sometimes she'd linger in the doorway, sometimes she'd sit on the armchair across the room, pretending to scroll through her phone while listening to our conversations. Once, Ella excused herself early for a call, leaving me and Clara alone. The silence that followed was almost palpable. She looked at the open poetry book on the desk and asked, "Do you always read like that?" "Like you mean every word." I smiled shyly. "I think words lose their magic when you don't." "That must make you dangerous," she said softly, setting her glass down. I laughed, unsure how to take it. "Dangerous? I teach teenagers metaphors." "Exactly." Her eyes gleamed with something unreadable. "Metaphors can ruin lives." There it was again, that current running beneath her calm, that quiet daring. I wanted to ask what she meant, but I couldn't. Instead, I gathered my notes, murmured goodnight, and left. Outside, the sky was streaked with fading orange. I told myself it was just work, a tutoring job, nothing else. But as I rode home, wind biting my face, all I could see was the way she looked at me, not with intention, not yet, but with recognition. Like she already knew the secret neither of us had spoken aloud. It didn't take long for the rhythm of their house to become familiar. The smell of black coffee in the afternoons, the way the light cut through the tall windows and pooled across the marble floors. By the third week, the silence between lessons began to feel almost companionable. Almost. Ella's focus hadn't improved much. She was bright but restless, always half in another world. Some days she'd cancel at the last minute, and Clara would appear at the door instead, graceful, apologetic, sometimes barefoot with that same calm that always made my pulse skip. "She's gone to a friend's again," she'd say, leaning against the doorway. "You came all this way?" "At least stay for some tea," I told myself. It would be rude to refuse, so I stayed. At first, our conversations were light, books, music, small observations about the neighborhood, but slowly, the walls between us began to fade. She'd ask about my classes, and I'd ask about her life before the divorce. Sometimes she'd laugh mid-sentence, then pause as if remembering she hadn't done that in a long time. "I used to love literature," she said once, swirling her tea absently. "Then life got too busy for fiction." I smiled. "Fiction's the only way I survive university. It's cheaper than therapy." She laughed again, the sound soft and a little sad. "You make everything sound romantic." "I don't mean to. I think you do." Her gaze held mine across the kitchen table, steady, unreadable. For a second, it felt like the whole house was holding its breath. Then she looked away. "You're very young, Mira." "I get told that a lot," I said, pretending it didn't sting. "Usually right before someone underestimates me." Her eyes flicked back to mine, sharp with surprise, and then softened, amused. "Noted." The kettle whistled, breaking whatever had been building between us. Still, that evening lingered in my mind longer than it should have. A few days later, I arrived during one of those unpredictable monsoon evenings, rain clattering against the glass walls, thunder rolling in the distance. The house felt different in the storm, quieter but somehow more alive. Clara opened the door, hair loose, a cardigan falling off one shoulder. "Ella's not home yet," she said, glancing at the clock. "Traffic, probably. Would you mind waiting?" I nodded. The word no didn't even occur to me. She led me to the study. I sat on the couch while she poured 2 glasses of wine. The rain outside blurred the world into a gray haze. She sat beside me, closer than before, and for a long while neither of us spoke. "You must think we're a strange family," she said finally, voice quiet. "A mother who drinks too much wine and a daughter who hates poetry." "I think you're human," I said, surprising myself. That made her smile, a slow, genuine curve of the lips. I forgot what that felt like, being seen like one. She looked out the window then, her reflection faint in the glass. I noticed how her fingers traced the rim of her glass absently, and I wanted to tell her that she didn't seem broken, not to me, just tired of pretending to be perfect. When Ella finally came home, the moment between us dissolved like mist. The next day I told myself it was nothing. Just kindness mistaken for connection, but every time I saw her after that, I caught myself searching her face for that same quiet softness, that fleeting vulnerability she'd let slip. The weeks blurred. Ella's attendance dropped, her excuses got lazier, and Clara's invitations grew bolder. "Stay for dinner," she'd say, pouring another glass of wine. "She won't be home until late anyway." Sometimes we ate in silence. Sometimes we talked about everything: her failed marriage, my half-finished thesis, the books that changed us. She listened like she wanted to memorize every word I said, and the way she looked at me sometimes, not as an employee, not even as a friend, made my chest tighten until it was hard to breathe. One evening, she asked me to read aloud. "It's been ages since I heard someone read poetry properly," she said, settling onto the couch. I chose "Somewhere I Have Never Traveled" by I.E. Cummings. The words felt too intimate, too exposed, but her eyes were on me the whole time, steady and intent. When I finished, she didn't speak right away. "I'd forgotten," she murmured, "that words can touch you like that." Her voice trembled slightly, and I realized she wasn't talking about the poem anymore. I set the book down. "Clara?" She smiled, but her eyes were glassy. "You make this house feel less empty." Before I could respond, a sound from upstairs, the creak of a door, Ella calling for her mother. The moment shattered. Clara stood quickly, smoothing her hair, her calm composure returning like armor. "Thank you for staying late," she said softly, almost formally. "Drive safe, all right?" I nodded, gathering my things. But as I reached the doorway, she touched my arm. Light, hesitant. "Mira." I turned. Her hand lingered for a heartbeat too long before she pulled it back. "Never mind," she whispered, retreating into the dim hallway. That night, I couldn't sleep. The rain had stopped, but the sound of it still played in my head, soft, rhythmic, like her voice. I told myself I was imagining things, that she was just lonely and I was reading too much into kindness. But somewhere deep down, a quieter voice whispered that I wasn't imagining it at all. The next afternoon, my phone buzzed. A message from her. "Ella's gone for the weekend. I was wondering if you could help me organize her notes and maybe have dinner." No pressure, of course. I stared at the screen until my heart settled into a steady, aching beat. Maybe I should have said no. Maybe I should have remembered what boundaries look like. But instead, I found myself typing back before I could stop. "Sure, I'll be there at 7, and as I hit send, I caught my reflection in the window with the faintest smile curving my lips. I didn't know it then, but that single message was about to change everything. I never thought a simple dinner invitation would become the beginning of something I'd spend the rest of my life trying to understand, or trying not to fall into. The sky had deepened to a navy velvet by the time I returned to the house. Streetlights pulled gold on the driveway, and the faint hum of the city seemed miles away. I held my bag a little too tightly, my hands sweaty despite the cool air. Every step toward the door felt like stepping into something forbidden, something I wasn't supposed to want, yet couldn't resist. Clara opened the door almost immediately, as if she had been waiting for me. She wore a soft sweater that fell loosely over one shoulder, her hair pinned back haphazardly, strands escaping to frame her face. Her eyes, usually so composed, flickered with something unspoken when she saw me. "Come in," she said, voice low, inviting. I stepped inside, aware of the quiet hum of the house around us. It smelled faintly of cinnamon and polished wood. Familiar now, yet still foreign. Like someone else's world, I was only partially allowed to enter. She motioned toward the living room. "I brought your notes," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, though my stomach had started doing that fluttery thing it always did when she was near. Clara waved a hand, dismissing the papers. "We can worry about those later. Dinner first." The table was small, intimate, set for two with soft lighting from the chandelier above. I took a seat across from her, trying to focus on the simplicity of the meal, the aroma of roasted vegetables and garlic filling the room, but it was impossible to ignore the way she watched me. Not in a casual way, but in a way that made my skin tingle. We ate slowly, talking about everything and nothing. She asked about my studies, my favorite poets, the dreams I carried in the quiet moments when no one was watching. I told her about my scholarship essays, the nights I spent reading under the dim glow of my desk lamp. She laughed softly at my anecdotes, a laugh that wrapped around me like a warm blanket, and I realized how easy it had become to speak freely to her. "I never had anyone to talk to like this when I was your age," she said, voice quieter now, almost vulnerable. "I thought I'd forgotten what it felt like. To be heard. Really heard." Her words struck something deep in me. I wanted to reach across the table to tell her she was more than heard, that she was seen, completely in ways no one else had ever managed, but I didn't. I simply nodded, letting the silence between us stretch a little longer than necessary. After dinner, we moved to the couch with our glasses of wine. The soft clinking of the glass the only sound breaking the quiet. Outside, the rain had started again, gentle at first, then tapping steadily against the windows. The storm made the room feel cocooned, removed from the rest of the world. Clara sat close enough that our knees brushed. I felt the jolt, sharp and electric, and looked away quickly, pretending to examine the faint patterns in the carpet, but she didn't move back. Instead, she leaned slightly toward me, the soft warmth of her body brushing mine. Subtle, almost accidental. "I'm glad you stayed," she said, voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed, unsure whether to say something foolish or remain quiet. I wanted to," I admitted. My own voice hushed. Her hand hovered near mine for a heartbeat, almost brushing the back of my hand. Then, just as quickly, she pulled back, picking up her wine glass again, though her fingers lingered near the rim as if reluctant to let go. For a long while, we sat like that, talking, glancing at one another, the tension stretching between us like a taut string. It wasn't bold, it wasn't daring, but it was real. Every look, every pause, every half-smile carried a weight neither of us acknowledged but both understood. At some point, the conversation drifted to books again. I read a passage aloud from one of my favorite novels, and she listened like I was revealing secrets meant only for her. The words seemed to hang in the air, heavier than the wine, heavier than the quiet, heavier than the house itself. Then she sighed, leaning back against the couch. "I don't remember the last time someone made me feel this way," she said, voice soft, almost breaking. I didn't answer because I couldn't. My throat tightened, my heart raced. I wanted to reach for her, to tell her she wasn't alone, that I felt it too. This impossible, exquisite pull, but I stayed still, letting the words hang between us. Finally, she set her glass down and met my eyes squarely. Mira. Her name on her lips was something I could barely breathe, and for a brief, suspended moment I thought she might say what I had been longing to hear. But instead, she exhaled softly and shook her head. "We shouldn't." The doorbell rang, both of us jumped, and in a flash the spell of the night shattered. I hadn't even realized how close we'd been sitting. Clara's composure returned instantly, smooth and practiced, as if nothing had happened. "Ella," I murmured, though I knew the answer. She gave a small, ironic smile. "Probably. Go home, Mira. We'll deal with the notes later." I gathered my things, every step heavy with unsaid words. At the door, she gave me a long, lingering look as if memorizing me before letting me leave. Her hand brushed mine as she handed me a jacket I hadn't noticed on the coat rack. The touch was light, fleeting, but it left a trail of warmth up my arm that I couldn't shake. Outside, the rain had softened to a drizzle, mist curling around the streetlights. I kept replaying her look over and over the way she lingered near me, over the words she hadn't said. The house behind me was silent, and yet it felt like it had swallowed something important, a promise, a warning, a beginning. I never thought a simple dinner would feel like stepping off a cliff that one evening could carry more weight than weeks of normal conversation. But I knew, as I walked through the mist, that this was just the beginning, that whatever line existed between us, we had already crossed it, and there was no turning back. The days after that dinner were unbearable. Every text, every glance from Clara lingered longer than it should have, yet every attempt at conversation felt heavier, weighed down by unspoken rules. I kept replaying that night, the closeness, the brush of her hand, the way her gaze had held mine a fraction too long, and tried to convince myself it was harmless, that it was just a fleeting spark, but harmless sparks had a way of igniting into flames. When I arrived for tutoring, Ella was unusually attentive. Perhaps sensing my distraction, she focused harder than ever on the texts in front of her. But Clara lingered near the doorway again, her presence pulling at me with that magnetic weight I couldn't resist. I could feel the tension in the room crackling between us, unspoken and urgent, and my chest tightened in a way that made every word I tried to say stumble. "You're quiet today," Clara said softly, leaning against the edge of the desk. Her perfume, faint but intoxicating, made my head spin. "I'm fine," I murmured, though my voice betrayed me. "Just tired." She tilted her head, eyes narrowing with a perceptive glint. "It's more than that, isn't it?" I wanted to say yes. I wanted to tell her that every thought, every beat of my heart belonged to her. Heart that I couldn't look at her without feeling exposed, alive, and terrified all at once. But I didn't. Instead, I tried to hide behind tutoring exercises, correcting Ella's essays with a nervous edge, forcing my mind into metrics and margins. Clara moved closer, leaning just enough that her warmth brushed my arm. "You're far too serious with her," she said lightly, but her eyes were heavy with something deeper. "You should relax. Enjoy yourself." Even for a moment I swallowed hard. The nearness of her body, the subtle brush of her fingers as she shifted, set something alight in me I didn't want to admit. I couldn't. She was Ella's mother, twice my age, a line I had no right to cross, and yet every rational thought screamed against the pounding of my heart, against the ache that grew with every small touch, every stolen glance. Later, after Ella had gone off to a friend's house, the atmosphere in the house shifted. Clara suggested we organize Ella's study material, a pretext perhaps, but one I didn't question. The storm outside mirrored the tension inside. As we worked side by side, I felt her brush against me more often, deliberate yet subtle. A hand passing close enough to graze my wrist, a shoulder just behind mine, fingers lingering over papers I had just touched. Every movement was a conversation in itself, speaking of desire, hesitation, and fear. At one point, she leaned over to reach for a notebook and our eyes met. There was a silence. A heartbeat stretched into eternity, and she didn't pull away. I could feel the warmth of her breath, the faint tremor in her fingers. "I shouldn't," she began, voice low, but she didn't finish. "I know," I whispered. "I know." Yet the words were empty against the truth in her gaze. There was longing there, raw and uncontained, and it mirrored my own. I could see it in the slight curve of her lips, the tilt of her head, the way her eyes softened when they found mine. We sat there, inches apart, and for a long time neither moved nor spoke, as if daring the other to break the tension first. Then, just as quickly, the moment broke. Clara stepped back, rearranged a stack of papers, cleared her throat. The air between us shifted, charged but suddenly formal again. Like the storm had passed but left everything damp and heavy. "I should leave," I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my effort to sound calm. She nodded, composure returning in an almost painful mask of civility. "Drive safely," she said softly. The words, a barrier, a promise, and a confession all at once. Outside, I walked to my scooter with a sense of both exhilaration and dread. Every nerve in my body was alive, buzzing with a mixture of guilt and desire. I had crossed invisible lines, felt the spark, and now the pull was undeniable. I couldn't unsee it, couldn't unsense it, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. For the rest of the week, our interactions were both the same and impossibly different. Each touch, each glance carried the weight of that night. I began noticing small details, the way her hair caught the sunlight through the windows, the tilt of her head when she listened, the soft sigh she let out when she thought I wasn't paying attention. And every moment, I felt the temptation, the tension, and the impossible desire for something I wasn't allowed to want. But guilt was a shadow we couldn't escape. Every time I felt her nearness, I remembered the rules, the age difference, the daughter, and the very real consequences if anyone discovered how close we had become. It made every smile, every touch, every unspoken word more electric. The danger itself made the pull stronger, almost impossible to resist. One evening, as I left, Clara lingered at the doorway longer than usual. The rain had stopped, leaving the world wet and glistening in the streetlights. She said nothing at first, just watched me. Then she whispered, barely audible, "Be careful with your heart, Mira. Mine isn't safe either." I froze, her words catching in my chest. They were a warning. They were a confession, and they were the first real acknowledgement of the impossible thing between us. I nodded mutely, unable to speak. As I mounted my scooter and pulled away, the reflection of the house in my rearview mirror seemed different, warmer, heavier, and full of unspoken promises, and I knew with a certainty that terrified me that nothing would ever be the same again. I never thought a single evening could unravel everything I thought I knew about myself, about desire, boundaries, and what it meant to be truly seen. But somehow, that night had done exactly that, and I realized, with both fear and anticipation, that we had only just begun to understand what this forbidden connection could mean. The house felt different when I returned that evening. Warmer, softer, like it had been holding its breath for us both. Ella was away at a weekend program, leaving the quiet to stretch luxuriously between Clara and me. I carried my bag hesitantly, almost afraid that the tension we'd built over weeks would shatter the moment I stepped inside. Clara was in the living room, perched on the couch with her laptop open, but she looked up the instant I entered. Her eyes, that same magnetic pull I had tried to resist, softened when she saw me. "Mira," she said, voice carrying the weight of unsaid words. "I was hoping you'd come." I smiled, trying to mask the nervous flutter in my chest. I wouldn't miss it. We spent the first hour quietly organizing Ella's notes, textbooks, and scattered essays. Our hands brushed repeatedly over the papers, and each touch sent a jolt through me I couldn't explain or deny. There was no rushing, no clumsy urgency, only the delicate, deliberate closeness of two people aware of the line they were skirting. When the last notebook was stacked neatly, Clara leaned back, her gaze lingering on mine longer than usual. The warmth in her eyes contrasted sharply with the cool, measured calm she always projected. "You've changed this house," she murmured, made it lighter. "You've changed me too," I whispered before thinking, and the words hung between us, heavier than any line I'd crossed. She looked startled, then closed the distance between us, a slow, deliberate movement that erased any remaining space. Her hand brushed a strand of hair from my face, lingering longer than necessary. My heart raced, but I didn't pull away. I wanted this. I wanted her. I shouldn't, she said, her voice trembling slightly. It's wrong. I know, I admitted, but it feels right. Her eyes searched mine, desperate, questioning, and in that instant, I realized there was no turning back. The air between us thickened, filled with the weight of weeks of longing, hesitation, and silent confessions. And then softly, deliberately, she leaned closer. Our lips met in a hesitant, lingering kiss, electric and tender all at once. It was everything and nothing, a quiet acknowledgement of desire and danger both intertwined. I felt her fingers graze my wrist, a gentle but commanding presence grounding me even as I felt my world tilt. When we finally parted, our foreheads pressed together, breaths mingling. I could feel the pulse of her heart and strong, alive, and in perfect rhythm with mine. Mira, she whispered, as if even saying my name aloud risked shattering the fragile balance. I'm here, I said, and I'm not going anywhere. We didn't speak for a long while. The silence was full, comforting, electric. We were both acutely aware of the risks, the forbidden nature of what we were doing, but in that moment neither of us cared. There was only the connection, the quiet understanding, the promise that had been building between us since the first night I stepped into the house. Hours passed unnoticed. The rain outside had stopped, leaving the world outside slick and quiet, and as I finally gathered my things to leave, Clara took my hand, squeezing it with a warmth and certainty I could feel all the way to my core. Whatever this is, she said softly, let's not pretend it doesn't exist. I won't, I replied, a smile tugging at my lips despite the tumult of emotions inside me. I walked back to my scooter through the softly lit street, heart pounding, mind spinning. Every fiber of my being was alight with the reality of what we'd shared, the thrill and danger of crossing a line I wasn't supposed to cross. I knew the road ahead would be complicated, tangled with guilt, temptation, and unspoken rules, but for the first time in weeks I felt undeniably, dangerously alive. I never thought I'd fall for someone I wasn't supposed to want, yet here I am, heart in my hands, and the world feels impossibly bright and terrifying all at once. We've crossed a line I swore I'd never approach, and I can't tell if it's liberation or a trap. What are we now? Forbidden lovers or something deeper? I don't know, but I do know I can't walk away. Tell me, would you dare to cross the line if it felt this inevitable?